4 teenagers disappear on trail, and 7 years later, drone footage leaves everyone devastated. My name is Detective Sarah Martinez, and I spent 32 years with the Colorado State Police. In all my years of service, I've worked hundreds of cases: murders, kidnappings, armed robberies. But there's one case that still haunts me to this day. A case that changed not just my career, but my entire perspective on what we think we know about the wilderness that surrounds us. It was the summer of 2016 when 4 teenagers from Denver decided to take what should have been a routine hiking trip on the Maroon Bells trail near Aspen. What happened next would become one of the most baffling disappearances in Colorado history, until 7 years later, when drone footage would reveal a truth so devastating it would shake our entire community to its core. The perfect summer day. Let me take you back to July 15th, 2016. It was one of those picture-perfect Colorado summer days. Crystal blue skies, temperature sitting at a comfortable 72 degrees, not a cloud in sight. The kind of day that draws thousands of hikers to our beautiful Rocky Mountains. The 4 kids were all juniors at Cherry Creek High School in Denver. There was Emma Rodriguez, 17 years old, captain of the debate team and honor roll student. Her best friend since childhood, Madison Foster, also 17, a talented artist who dreamed of studying at the Art Institute of Colorado. Then there were the boyfriends, Jake Morrison, 18, star quarterback of the football team, and his buddy Marcus Chen, 17, valedictorian material with plans to study engineering at CU Boulder. These weren't your typical rebellious teenagers looking for trouble. These were good kids from good families, kids who followed rules, who called their parents, who had bright futures ahead of them. That's what made what happened so much more terrifying. Emma had planned this hiking trip for weeks. She'd researched the trail extensively, printed out maps, checked weather conditions multiple times. The Maroon Bells Trail is one of Colorado's most popular hiking destinations, a moderate 3.6-mile round trip that leads to some of the most photographed peaks in North America. It's well-maintained, well-marked, and heavily trafficked. In other words, it should have been perfectly safe. At 6:47 a.m. that morning, Emma posted on Instagram, "Perfect day for an adventure, Maroon Bells here we come. Colorado life, hiking day, best friends forever." The photo showed all 4 kids standing next to Jake's red Jeep Wrangler in the driveway of Emma's family home in Denver. They were all smiling, wearing matching hiking boots Emma had insisted they all buy the week before. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's mother, told me later that she'd made them a packed lunch, sandwiches, trail mix, plenty of water. She'd hugged each of them goodbye and made Emma promise to text her when they reached the top, and again when they started heading back down. Emma rolled her eyes but agreed. "Mom, it's like the most popular trail in Colorado. We'll be fine." Those would be the last words Mrs. Rodriguez would ever hear her daughter speak. The journey to Maroon Bells. The drive from Denver to the Maroon Bells trailhead takes about 4 hours. Security footage from a gas station in Georgetown shows the kids stopping at 9:23 a.m. Jake filled up the Jeep while the others went inside to buy snacks and use the restroom. The clerk, a young man named Tyler Webb, remembered them clearly. "They were in great spirits," Tyler told me during our interview. "The girl with the dark hair, Emma, I think, she was asking me about the best spots to take pictures at Maroon Bells. Said it was their first time hiking there. They seemed excited, you know, like any group of kids on summer vacation." The last confirmed sighting of the group was at 11:45 a.m. when they arrived at the Maroon Bells parking area. A park ranger named Frank Sullivan checked their parking pass and reminded them that the last shuttle back to the parking area ran at 6 p.m. "Make sure you're back by then," he told them. "You don't want to be walking that road in the dark." The kids assured him they'd be back with plenty of time to spare. The hike to Maroon Lake and back typically takes 2 to 3 hours for most hikers. They had over 6 hours, more than enough time, or so everyone thought. A family from Texas, the Hendersons, remembered seeing the 4 teenagers at the beginning of the trail around noon. "They were taking pictures by the sign," Mrs. Henderson recalled. "The boys were being silly, making faces, and the girls were laughing. They looked like they were having the time of their lives." At 12:47 p.m., Emma sent her last text message to her mother. "Trail is gorgeous. Made it to the lake. Heading to the viewpoint now. Love you, Mom." Along with the text was a beautiful selfie of all 4 kids, with Maroon Lake glittering in the background behind them. That photo would become one of the most haunting images I've ever seen. 4 beautiful young faces, full of life and joy, completely unaware that they had less than an hour left to live, when everything changed. At 6:15 p.m., when the last shuttle was preparing to leave, Frank Sullivan noticed Jake's red Jeep Wrangler was still in the parking lot. This was concerning, but not uncommon. Sometimes hikers lose track of time or decide to extend their hike. He waited an additional 30 minutes, hoping to see 4 familiar faces emerge from the trail. By 7 p.m., with daylight beginning to fade, Frank made the call that would launch one of the largest search and rescue operations in Colorado history. Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, received the call at 7:23 p.m. "Ma'am, this is Ranger Sullivan from the Maroon Bells area. Your daughter Emma was supposed to return from a hike today, but her group hasn't come back yet. We're organizing a search party now." Maria's world shattered in that instant. "But she texted me," she kept saying. "She texted me at 12:47. They were fine. They were happy." Within 2 hours, we had over 50 searchers combing the Maroon Bells area. Search and rescue teams, volunteer firefighters, local police, and dozens of community members who'd heard about the missing teenagers on the news. The search continued through the night, illuminated by powerful floodlights and guided by the barking of search dogs. I arrived on scene at 11 p.m., and I'll never forget the sight that greeted me. 4 sets of parents clinging to each other, their faces etched with a terror that only a parent of a missing child can understand. Jake's father kept pacing back and forth, checking his phone every few seconds, hoping for a call that would never come. Madison's mother sat in complete silence, staring at the trail entrance as if willing her daughter to emerge from the darkness. Sacre for dessert. The search intensifies. By dawn on July 16th, our search had grown to over 200 people. We had K-9 units, helicopter support, and technical rescue teams capable of accessing the most difficult terrain. The FBI had been notified, and agents were driving up from Denver to assist with what was now being treated as a potential kidnapping case. The dogs picked up the scent trail easily at first. It led exactly where you'd expect, from the parking area along the main trail toward Maroon Lake. But here's where things started to get strange. At approximately the 1.8-mile mark, just past the lake, the scent trail began to become inconsistent. "It's like they scattered," K-9 handler officer Janet Murphy told me. "Usually when we're tracking a group, the scents stay together, especially on a maintained trail like this. But here, it's like they suddenly went in 4 different directions." We found Emma's water bottle about 200 yards off the main trail, sitting on a flat rock as if it had been carefully placed there. It was still half full, with no signs of a struggle nearby. About a quarter mile from there, we discovered one of Jake's hiking boots, but only one. It was sitting upright next to a tree, laces still tied, as if he'd simply stepped out of it. These discoveries made no sense. Why would Emma abandon her water bottle when she was clearly well hydrated? Why would Jake continue hiking with only one boot? And if something had happened to them, an accident, an animal attack, foul play, where were the other signs? Where was the blood, the torn clothing, the disturbed ground that typically accompanies trauma? On the second day of searching, we made another puzzling discovery. Madison's sketchbook was found wedged between 2 rocks near Crater Lake, almost 2 miles off the main trail. The book was open to a page containing a detailed drawing of the Maroon Bells peaks, but the drawing appeared unfinished. Her art supplies, expensive colored pencils that Madison's father said she never went anywhere without, were scattered in a perfect circle around the sketchbook, as if they'd been deliberately arranged. Button. Expanding the investigation. As the days turned into weeks, our search area expanded to cover nearly 50 square miles of some of Colorado's most rugged terrain. We brought in specialized teams from Wyoming and Utah, experts in high-altitude search and rescue who knew every trick for finding missing persons in mountain environments. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created profiles of each teenager, looking for any reason why they might have run away or gotten involved in something dangerous. What they found painted a picture of 4 well-adjusted kids with everything to live for. Emma was planning to attend Columbia University in New York to study journalism. She'd already been accepted early admission and had spent months planning her future career. Madison had been commissioned to create artwork for 3 local businesses and was saving money for college. Jake had received a full football scholarship to Colorado State University. Marcus was valedictorian of his class and had been accepted to MIT. None of these kids had any reason to disappear voluntarily. They had no history of depression, no involvement with drugs or alcohol, no troubled relationships. Their social media accounts showed typical teenage activities: homework complaints, weekend plans, excitement about graduation and college. We investigated every possible lead. A homeless man reported seeing 4 teenagers near Independence Pass at around 3 p.m. on July 15th. But when we showed him photos, he couldn't positively identify our missing kids. A woman in Glenwood Springs called to say she'd seen them at a McDonald's the day after they disappeared. But security footage proved she was mistaken. The most promising lead came from a couple of experienced hikers, the Johnsons, who claimed they'd seen the 4 teenagers on a rarely used trail that branched off from the main Maroon Bells path. They seemed lost, Mrs. Johnson told us. The dark-haired girl. She had a map in her hands and kept pointing in different directions. We asked if they needed help, but they said they were fine. We searched that trail extensively. It led to a remote area called Devil's Punch Bowl, a collection of deep pools and waterfalls that experienced hikers sometimes used for swimming. But again, we found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no signs that anyone had been there recently. The theories begin. As months passed without any new evidence, theories began to emerge. Some believed the teenagers had fallen into one of the many hidden crevasses that dot the high country, their bodies lost forever in the depths of the mountain. Others suggested they'd been victims of a serial killer who was familiar with the area and knew how to dispose of bodies where they'd never be found. The most disturbing theory came from Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who'd worked on similar cases. She suggested that the teenagers might have encountered someone who forced them to remove their shoes and belongings before marching them to a remote location. The careful placement of items we've found suggests someone who wanted to send a message, she told us. This wasn't random. This was planned. Local conspiracy theorists had their own ideas. Some claimed the teenagers had discovered something in the mountains that they weren't supposed to see, maybe an illegal marijuana grow operation, maybe something more sinister. These theories gained traction on social media, with amateur investigators analyzing every photo the teenagers had posted, looking for clues we might have missed. The families never gave up hope. They organized annual searches, hired private investigators, and kept the story alive in the media. Emma's mother, Maria, became a fierce advocate for missing persons cases, appearing on news programs and speaking at conferences about the need for better search and rescue resources. "My daughter is out there somewhere," she'd say, her voice never wavering despite the years of pain. "I won't stop looking for her until I know what happened." 7 years of silence. By 2023, the case had gone cold. We'd exhausted every lead, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and searched thousands of acres of wilderness. The teenager's disappearance had become one of those unsolved mysteries that haunt law enforcement, a case where we know something terrible happened, but we can't prove what or why. I retired from the police force in 2019, but I never stopped thinking about Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus. Their faces were burned into my memory. I kept copies of all the case files in my home office, and I'd review them periodically, hoping to spot something we'd missed. The families had learned to live with the uncertainty, though it never got easier. Jake's parents divorced 2 years after his disappearance. The strain of not knowing what happened to their son was too much for their marriage to survive. Emma's mother had developed anxiety so severe that she could barely leave her house. Madison's father started drinking heavily and lost his job. Marcus's parents moved to Florida, saying they couldn't bear to stay in Colorado, where every mountain reminded them of their lost son. The case was officially reclassified as a cold case in 2021, though the families were assured that any new evidence would be thoroughly investigated. None of us expected that evidence to come from the sky. Saksarm, the drone discovery. In June 2023, a tech company called Mountain Vista Mapping was conducting an aerial survey of the Maroon Bells area using state-of-the-art drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and ground-penetrating radar. The company had been contracted by the U.S. Forest Service to create detailed topographical maps for trail planning and environmental monitoring. The drone operator that day was a young man named David Park, a recent graduate from UC Denver with a degree in Geographic Information Systems. David had been flying drones for the company for about 6 months and had conducted dozens of similar surveys throughout Colorado. It was around 2:30 p.m. when David noticed something unusual on his monitor. His drone was flying over an area called Echo Basin, about 4 miles from the main Maroon Bells trail and nearly 3 miles from where we'd found Madison's sketchbook. The terrain here was extremely rugged, a series of steep cliffs, narrow ledges, and deep crevasses that made ground-based searching nearly impossible. At first, I thought it was just rock formations, David told me later. The shadows and the way the light was hitting the cliffs created all kinds of interesting patterns. But something about this particular formation made me take a closer look. David maneuvered his drone lower, switching to a higher resolution camera mode. What he saw on his screen made his blood run cold. Carved into the face of a nearly vertical cliff, about 300 feet above the valley floor, was a shelter. But this wasn't a natural cave or rock overhang. This was clearly man-made, a carefully constructed structure built into the cliff face, with what appeared to be a narrow ledge providing the only access. And scattered on that ledge were items that David immediately recognized as human artifacts. The shocking truth revealed. David immediately contacted his supervisor, who called the Forest Service, who called the Sheriff's Department, who called me. Even though I was retired, I was the detective most familiar with the case, and they wanted my expertise in determining whether this discovery was related to our missing teenagers. I arrived at the Mountain Vista mapping office within an hour. David showed me the drone footage on a large computer monitor, and I felt the same chill he must have experienced. The shelter was ingeniously concealed. From ground level, it would be completely invisible, hidden by the natural contours of the cliff face. Only an aerial view from precisely the right angle could reveal its existence. But it was the artifacts that made my heart race. Scattered on the narrow ledge outside the shelter were items that looked disturbingly familiar. Pieces of fabric that could have been clothing, what appeared to be hiking equipment, and most chillingly, what looked like 4 distinct areas where someone might have been sitting or lying down. We organized an immediate expedition to the site. This wasn't going to be easy. Reaching that ledge would require expert rock climbers and specialized equipment. We contacted the same technical rescue team that had searched for the teenagers 7 years earlier, and they agreed to attempt the dangerous climb. On June 28, 2023, exactly 7 years and 13 days after the teenagers disappeared, rescue climber Maria Santos rappelled down to the hidden shelter. What she found inside would change everything we thought we knew about this case. The shelter was more sophisticated than it had appeared from the air. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating a livable space carved directly into the rock. There were makeshift beds, a small fire pit with a natural chimney that vented through cracks in the rock, and a collection area for rainwater. But most importantly, there were personal items that definitively belonged to our missing teenagers. Emma's hiking backpack was there, still containing her wallet with her driver's license. Madison's art supplies, the expensive colored pencils her father had mentioned, were carefully organized in a handmade wooden box. Jake's football team jersey was folded neatly in one corner. Marcus's calculator, the advanced scientific model he'd received as a graduation gift, sat on a natural stone shelf. And then, Maria found something that broke all our hearts. The final messages. Hidden beneath a loose stone in the back of the shelter, Maria discovered a waterproof container. Inside were several sheets of paper covered in handwriting. The papers were journal entries, written by Emma Rodriguez during the final days of her life. Reading those entries was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my career. Emma's words painted a picture of 4 teenagers who had become hopelessly lost, who had found this shelter as a last resort, and who had slowly realized that no one was going to find them in time. According to Emma's journal, the group had taken a wrong turn at the 1.8-mile marker, exactly where the K9 units had lost their scent trail. They'd followed what they thought was a shortcut back to the main trail, but instead had wandered deeper into the wilderness. By the time they realized their mistake, they were completely disoriented. "We've been walking for hours," Emma wrote in her first entry. "None of us recognizes anything. Jake says we should stay put and wait for help, but Madison is getting really scared. We can hear helicopters in the distance, but they seem so far away." The teenagers had spent 2 days trying to find their way back to the main trail, becoming increasingly exhausted and dehydrated. It was Marcus who had spotted the hidden ledge and suggested they take shelter there until rescue teams could find them. "Marcus thinks this might have been used by Native Americans or early settlers," Emma wrote. "It's actually pretty cozy once you get used to it. We can see for miles from here. Surely someone will spot us soon." But as the days turned into weeks, their hope began to fade. Emma's final entries were heartbreaking. She wrote letters to her parents, telling them how much she loved them and asking them not to blame themselves. She described how the 4 friends had taken care of each other, sharing their remaining food and water, telling stories to keep their spirits up, and making plans for all the things they'd do when they were rescued. "I'm not scared anymore," Emma wrote in what appeared to be her final entry. "If this is how it ends, at least I'm with my best friends. At least we're together." The devastating reality. The forensic investigation of the shelter revealed the full tragedy of what had happened to Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus. They had survived in that cliff-face shelter for nearly 3 weeks, slowly succumbing to exposure, dehydration, and starvation. Their remains were found in the back of the shelter, where they had arranged themselves close together, facing the opening that looked out over the beautiful Colorado mountains they had come to explore. The medical examiner determined that there had been no foul play. These 4 bright, beautiful teenagers had simply made one wrong turn on what should have been a routine hike, and that single mistake had cost them their lives. What made their deaths even more tragic was learning how close we had come to finding them. Our search teams had passed within half a mile of their location multiple times. Helicopters had flown directly over the area where they were sheltering. But the natural camouflage of the cliff face and the angle of the ledge had made their shelter completely invisible from below. Emma's journal revealed that they had heard our helicopters, had seen our searchlights, had even seen some of our ground teams in the distance. They had tried everything they could think of to signal for help, waving bright clothing, arranging rocks into patterns, even using Jake's belt buckle to reflect sunlight. But none of their signals had been spotted by our searchers. Chakichuar, the aftermath. The discovery of the teenagers' remains brought closure to their families, but it was a bitter kind of peace. After 7 years of wondering, of hoping, of imagining every possible scenario, they finally knew the truth. Their children had died together, caring for each other until the very end. Emma's mother, Maria, was the first to speak publicly after the discovery. "My daughter was braver than I ever knew," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She took care of her friends. She never gave up hope. She died as she lived, with courage and love in her heart." The families chose to have their children buried together in Denver, in a beautiful cemetery overlooking the mountains they had loved so much. The headstone reads, "Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus, together forever, in adventure and in peace." The discovery also led to significant changes in search and rescue protocols throughout Colorado. New drone technology is now standard equipment for all missing person cases in wilderness areas. Ground-penetrating radar is used more frequently to identify possible shelters or hiding places that might not be visible from the surface. Most importantly, the case highlighted the need for better education about wilderness safety. Too many people, especially young hikers, underestimate how quickly things can go wrong in the mountains. One wrong turn, one moment of overconfidence, one failure to properly prepare can turn a beautiful day hike into a life-or-death situation. Reflection and legacy. As I write this, it's been almost 8 years since Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus disappeared on that beautiful July morning. Their story has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and news programs around the world. Their families have established a foundation that provides wilderness safety education to young hikers and funds advanced search and rescue equipment for mountain communities. But for me, their legacy is more personal. Every time I see a group of teenagers heading out for a hike, I want to stop them and tell them Emma's story. I want to make sure they have proper maps, reliable communication devices, and most importantly, a detailed plan that they've shared with responsible adults. I think about those 4 kids often. I imagine them as they were in that last Instagram photo. Young, beautiful, full of dreams and possibilities. I think about the adventures they might have had, the careers they might have built, the families they might have raised. I think about all the ways they might have changed the world if they had just taken that left turn instead of the right one at the 1.8-mile marker. The mountains of Colorado are breathtakingly beautiful, but they are also unforgiving. They don't care about your plans, your dreams, or how much your family loves you. They demand respect, preparation, and humility from everyone who enters their domain. Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus learned this lesson too late, but their story serves as a powerful reminder to all of us who love the outdoors. The wilderness is not a playground. It's a force of nature that can turn deadly without warning. If you're planning a hiking trip, please learn from their tragedy. Tell someone exactly where you're going and when you plan to return. Carry proper equipment, including GPS devices and emergency beacons. Stay on marked trails, and never, ever underestimate the mountains. Because somewhere out there, 4 teenagers are still together on their eternal adventure, and they want to make sure that no other families have to endure the pain that their loved ones have carried for the past 8 years. The mountains took Emma, Madison, Jake, and Marcus from us, but their memory, their courage, and their love for each other will live on forever in the hearts of everyone who knew their story. May they rest in peace, together always, in the beautiful Colorado wilderness they died trying to explore. If you or someone you know is planning a wilderness adventure, please visit the National Association for Search and Rescue website for safety tips and preparation guides. Remember, the best search and rescue operation is the one that never has to happen. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories, and remember to stay safe out there. The mountains are waiting, but they'll wait forever. Make sure you're prepared for whatever they might bring.